Welcome back to the third episode of the Spartan Hoops podcast. I'm joined here today by my co-host, Greg Waddell. The sun is shining. Beer o'clock is around the corner, my friend. Happy Friday. How are you doing?
Doing great. The sun is shining. Players are transferring. The portal's still popping. You got to love it.
It's crazy. We still got a bunch to talk about. Usually this time is kind of entering the dead period. We released our first season review, off-season player profile of Marcus Bingham that is up on SpartanHoops.com. Personally, one of my favorite articles that I've ever written, and I think that it does a good job of kind of giving you an overview of how his season kind of ended last year and where it's going. We're going to be releasing a bunch. Greg did one on Joey Hauser that I'm really excited for everybody to see, and that is forthcoming as well. But let's just get right into kind of the news of the day, and then we'll start trekking from there. We found out yesterday Foster Loyer headed to Davidson. I think the A-10's a pretty good landing spot for him. Some talk about possibly would he maybe return. We have 2 spots left. He didn't really have any indication. I had told you, Greg, I think maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago that I'd heard some Davidson rumors, but then nothing kind of came to the surface. Now he finally is going. Happy for him there. Do you have anything thoughts-wise on that?
I think it's about the best landing spot that you could want if you're rooting for Foster Loyer to succeed at this point. Like, Davidson is historically a really good offensive team. They have a great offensive system. Bob McKillop's a great offensive coach. Kellen Grady is leaving. He was a super high use guard that succeeded at a really high level for multiple years. I believe their second leading scorer, Hung Jung Lee, who's like a wing scorer, is back next year. So, like, that's a nice little fit for a team that needs a primary ball handler, someone that can score. I think Foster will succeed at that level, especially because his athletic limitations aren't going to be as big of a deal. Like, there's still going to be an issue against that competition in that conference, but it's like a nice mix where he didn't go too low, where he's going to be like a first team all conference guy, but he also didn't stay in like high major where he was going to have the same issues he did at Michigan State. So I'm pumped about it. I'm happy for him. I mean, I'm rooting for the kid. I think he's due for a little dose of success after what he's been through the past couple of years.
I agree. I just want to see him come out one game and just be blazing threes, not having, concern in terms of the strength, the athleticism of seeing the guys that he's going to be seeing. It's a very good league, but it's a league that he can play in, like you said. So I'm excited to see. Hopefully the shoulder heals up and he's all right there.
What do you think for a stat projection, real quick before we go? What would you say for Foster is like a best case scenario at Davidson?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I don't know the answer to that because I'm not sure when he's going to be able to come back from that shoulder. I think that the process to heal from that is relatively long. So he might not get an off season, or it'll be a limited off season. So he'll be a little behind the 8 ball if that's the case. I have not seen any update on that. I probably would want to know that before, because if he comes into the season, he hasn't really practiced with the team. I think he's going to be, in kind of a tougher spot. But if he comes in healthy, I don't know. Is he going to be the starting point guard? I don't know anything about Davidson, so I can't.
I think he would. I had this debate with Carter the other day, and Carter's adamant he cannot be a double-digit scorer at this level. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I could squint my eyes.
8 points off the top of my head when I was like maybe 8 to 9 points, like close to maybe that, right?
I think if there's any school that could have him exceed that, it would be Davidson. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up with like 12 and 4 on pretty good percentages.
Okay. I'd like to hear it. So I guess we'll be tuning in a little to more to A10 and see how he does. So the Watts decision still looms. There's been chatter both ways. It seemed like something was heating up, maybe a week or two ago. He tweeted out, decision coming soon. I had heard that possibly it was going to be, today, and we haven't seen anything come down the pipeline yet. I think it's pretty clear at this point that he's not coming back. I have kind of waffled back and forth a few times during this last couple weeks, but I think that the pictures that he posted with Jordan Crawford the other day, Jordan is a known Izzo hater. I really would be surprised at this point if he comes back. We saw some, whoever tweeted that out, I'd have to go back and look regarding maybe DePaul interest. I would rather see him go to a place like Creighton myself. I know there was some original talk like a Creighton, a Xavier. If you're going to go to the Big East, go somewhere in the middle. Like, I'm not sure, like, going to a bottom barrel team in the Big East. Like, could he put up some nice production there? I'm sure that that's highly possible. They'll give him the double green light for sure. but do you really want to end your career like maybe not making the tournament again? I just think all around, if he ends up at DePaul, I'll just be a little sad about it. I know Jalen Terry's coming from Oregon, so you got like maybe a little bit of the misfits from MSU outcasts aligning there. So maybe there's a possibility. That would actually be a pretty exciting backcourt to watch. I'm not sure if defensively it's the best, but you'd see a lot of guys giving buckets, that's for sure. So I'm not sure what will end up happening with him. I've heard that a decision is relatively coming soon. I would expect it by the end of the month at least, maybe even next week. So we'll kind of see how that ends up going one way or the other. But what are your thoughts on where he possibly could land, and what do you think?
Yeah, it sounds like the rumblings are DePaul, so I'm not even going to speculate beyond that right now. Also, has Romeo Weems left for sure?
He declared for the NBA draft, and I don't think that he's currently draftable. Another guy that obviously Michigan State, I thought he was 100% going. I got to see him in high school. Probably one of the best athletes I've ever seen live in a high school setting. So athletic. He had a couple plays that game where he dunked over a guy. He like waited and slowed down on this guy that was going in for a layup and then caught him at the top of the glass. And then to end the first half, he hit almost a half-court mid-range three. I'm like, this guy can do it all. And I thought he would have been a perfect addition. I think Michigan State would have turned him into, something maybe closer to what they did with Aaron Henry. I think he would be on his way to the NBA, if not this year, then maybe in one more. I think that he probably made a bad decision, but end of the day, I'm not sure what's going to happen with him, but it seems to me as if it's a possibility he could return. And then you literally would have three potential guys that could be on MSU's roster all on DePaul. So
sign me up for that, man. Let's get Terry, Watson, Weems together for 1 year and see what happens.
It would be pretty fun. I think it would be fun for sure.
I think it would be more fun than it would be good basketball, but I'm still signed up for it.
Yes. I mean, who cares? It's the Big East. The Big East has kind of been trash basketball the last couple of years outside of Villanova. So it's one of those scenarios where you'd be able to flip them on every once in a while and be like, oh, well, look at that. We could have had 1 to 3 of those guys. So
what could have been?
Yeah, what could have been. Discussing just kind of the latest news. I didn't ever get a chance to kind of firmly give my thoughts on Emoni Bates. I did, the Twitter version, 2 minutes, 20 seconds. And I kind of encompassed basically everything that I wanted to say there. So I won't like hammer it home. But I think that what we saw this just last month in general, when he originally committed, the possibility of him coming to Michigan State for me was much higher than it was as kind of the time progressed. And I say that because of the NBA age limit, he kind of was really pigeonholed in a position where what were his options? To play another year of high school where he's not earning any money, to potentially be plastered wall to wall in somewhat of a circumstance like maybe Zion Williamson, where he's coast to coast being covered by ESPN on a daily basis. We saw what happened with Zion in that circumstance. He signed the most lucrative Nike shoe deal in the history of any rookie for the NBA. Or is it possible he could have maybe gone the G League route, which kind of arose that same time that he committed? We saw the success that guys like Jalen Green had, Kuminga, their draft stock kind of remained stable, and they should both be drafted in kind of that top 5 to 7. So there was a couple different options, and I thought, in terms of maximizing potential, earning capacity, that the college route was a possibility. And we've seen now maybe the name, image, likeness is going to be rapidly addressed. I still have some dubious thoughts if that's actually going to be into play coming into this next season, or if it's going to be delayed at least one more year. But there's a way for him to make money and earn value to his name. And part of that was because there was no questioning that he was the number one prospect in his class and potentially in the world. And that chatter kind of ended and died during the course of the season. I think what we saw with Ipsy Prep, is that he has a very nice game, that there are things that he does need to continue to work on, particularly his strength. And after this season kind of came through where he was able to pick and choose some of the teams that they're playing, and he's on the EYBL circuit, he runs into some circumstances where he's playing some guys that are going to be eventual professional guys that are high level, top 5-star type kids. And he struggled with some of that. The matchup with Jalen Duren, that Jonathan Gavoni, who does Draft Express and is probably one of 2 guys in the entire world who does, recruiting and NBA evaluation at a high level with Mike Schmitz from ESPN. And he essentially pointed out that there's some flaws with his efficiency, that there's some flaws with parts of his game where he's really taking difficult shots. And so there was a bit of a questioning maybe for the first time about, is he really the guy? Is he the guy that everyone's anointed him to be? And I think that has to be toned down a little bit. I think the next coming of LeBron James or Kevin Durant has to be at least shelved partially. And then Travis Branham comes out with an article, and I thought it was extremely well written. He's from 24/7, and he essentially said physically and just game-wise, his development was so far ahead of guys when he was a freshman and playing against the level of comp that he did, that it's not surprising that he was so far ahead. And now we fast forward to the years. He has had, in some regards, what I'd consider a bit of a plateau physically as well as in development. And so guys have caught up to him. And so now it becomes a situation where at all costs, his draft stock has to be protected. And I think that there has to be serious consideration for what their next step is. And we saw that the very next weekend after this comes out, he's pulled from the EYBL tournament and does not play. He ducks some of the competition because they want to make sure that they're controlling every part of the narrative. What do you think about that just generally? And was it a good thing for Michigan State? Did they dodge a bullet? Are you sad that he didn't come? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I originally, when he first committed, and it surprised everybody, I thought there was a legitimate chance he would play for Michigan State. But in the months after that, with the Akins fallout, which you put a great video out on that, by the way, just speaking to like the whole intangibles behind that and why people shouldn't panic and why people need to be adults in the room. But as soon as that happened, I was very skeptical this was ever going to end with Emoni Bates at Michigan State. And I think it's good that it happened now as opposed to a year from now. Like, let's kind of wipe our hands clean from this. Let's move on. And Emoni, I wish him well. Like, he's still a superstar. We got to be clear about that. No matter what happens, if his draft stock falls a little bit, he's going to be a very high level NBA player, barring injury or barring some freak development lapses. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a great college basketball player. That doesn't mean the mental and the emotions and the whole package off the court is something that is good for a basketball program like Michigan State. This has been a tumultuous couple of years with roster building, as everybody listening to this knows. And this is an off season right now where you're going through a bit of a clean slate refresh. And the guys going out and the guys coming in are all reflecting positively on the trajectory of the program right now. Obviously, if you can land the number one player in the class, that's a good thing. But when you take everything else in with him, it opened the door for a little more diciness. Like, if Emoni does commit to Michigan State, do other guys even like that? Is there infighting there? Is Izzo constantly worried about pleasing the family versus coaching how he normally coaches guys up? It would have been fascinating to see, but once it became unrealistic, it's a good thing it happened now. Everybody can move on. And Emoni, by the way, like, congrats. I think he's enjoying the whole recruitment process again. Everything about it with him and his family is for PR. It was about opening the school when he first committed. Right now, it's about, he had a couple bad AAU weekends, so let's spin it and make sure everybody knows he's getting those offers. But just so you know, Emoni, it's probably not the greatest thing to immediately decommit and then have your first tweet be, blessed to be offered by George Washington University. That's not doing what you think it's doing for your PR. Like, let's focus in on Texas, Memphis, some of the bigger schools. All of this isn't going to happen, though. It's like, let's just mute Emoni Bates for a little while, is my personal take.
I guess I would say if you thought that he was legitimately going to be playing college basketball, then schools like Kentucky and Duke and UCLA and some of the guys that recruit at all-time high levels are going to be throwing their hat into the ring. And you didn't see that. And I think that it remains to be seen if he, what kind of the path that he takes. But I would be really, really surprised if he actually plays college basketball, because I think that there's a serious risk at where he's at right now with his development, that if he reclassified and played college basketball, that he could potentially fall from a, top 2 or 3 pick to maybe somewhere later in the lottery. And that doesn't mean that he couldn't eventually get back to where he should be. But I think at this point in time, his dad and the group of advisors around him have gotten him as far as they possibly can. It's time to give up the reins, pass it to somebody who is an NBA trainer, pass it to somebody who has knowledge of where to take him to the next level. And I don't know if he's ever going to be able to do that. And it's going to be very fascinating for me to see it, because to a certain regard, playing at that G League Ignite and sending him to maybe California to work with NBA trainers to develop and mature away from kind of the scenario that he's in may be the best thing for him. And so whatever happens with him, I really, it's not going to move the needle that much for me. I was happy when he committed. I didn't think that he was ever really going to play. I thought at best it was a 50-50 shot. That kind of decreased over the years. And I think that I'm just glad that the chapter's shut and we've gotten past the point now where we really have to worry about, is he coming? Is he not coming? What's going to be the outcome? What's the baggage with that? How is everybody going to take it? So I think that we're just in a better spot all around for knowing, and we should have a much better idea of, where this roster is going now. And that's kind of the next pivot I wanted to get into. 2 roster spots left, 11 guys. I'm of the opinion that every single guy can play on this team, and that doesn't always happen, as we saw last year. This is a circumstance where somebody comes to the scorer's table during at any point in the game, basically. Is there anybody that you're really cringing and going, why are they bringing this guy in? I mean, we've gotten to the point now where you've caught a lot of what I would consider maybe some of the dead weight or some of the temptations from the staff. And we have a roster that, yes, there are better players than not on it, but there's not a guy that I would really midway through a first half be like, oh, there he is again at the scorer's table. We're going to have to complain about him. There's nobody on the team. So for me, I would like maybe a little extra veteran wing depth, but I'm okay with the way that the roster is set. Barring any type of injury, they have enough guys to plug the minutes that they need to. And I actually think that it will be helpful to him after a rotation that was just up and down and too wide last year to really be able to focus in on maybe 8 guys by the time you get into the heart of conference play and play your best 8.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's no one on the roster that's not like a worthy scholarship rotation player. Are all of them high level Big Ten rotation players? No, but I think there's at least hope that everyone could develop into that. Some of these guys are later in their careers. Like your Bingham piece, you wrote a lot of great words on why it hasn't come to fruition yet. And some of it's on the staff and some's on the player. But like a guy like AJ Hogarth's probably one of the weaker on paper pieces of this rotation. He's still an incoming sophomore. Like we have no idea what AJ Hogarth's going to end up looking like in the long term. But I am sitting here watching this offseason play out, pretty curious of what they're going to do with those 2 scholarships, because you don't hear the names being thrown around that Michigan State's throwing their hat in recruitments of guys that are in the portal right now. And I get they got their point guard, they got Tyson Walker. That's great. You don't want to step on any toes necessarily, but there's a lot of big names that have come and gone in the portal and are still coming in that I think could help this Michigan State team. And I think it's guys that would probably give a serious look if Tom Izzo called them. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a pretty big missed opportunity if they sit back and don't fill those last 2 scholarships. You might know more than me on if that's going to happen or not, but I kind of just assumed as this was playing out that one of the transfers, Watts or Loyer, would return just because they're not being active on it. But if that's not going to happen, I'm really hoping they fill those 2 spots or at least one of them.
Yeah, I don't know if they need to fill 2. I agree with you. I would like 1 and preferably be like a 6'5", 6'6" wing who can shoot the 3 and play defense. I think that's probably the one gap that maybe you see in it. They do have a couple pieces that you can kind of move up and down. I think Malik Hall is a guy that in a pinch could maybe play some 3. I think primarily you want him at the 4. Along with Hauser, obviously, and that's kind of a split time situation. We'll obviously get into that, somewhere down the road about kind of how the rotational minutes are shaking out. But I think that there's a couple different ways that you can do it. Like Max Christie will probably be your starting 2, but when Gabe is out, he can slide down over to the 3. And Akins and Walker, I think, can play beside each other because they're extremely quick. And Akins is an extremely good defender. So I think that you would run into a situation where you could have some interesting ball handling and quickness out in the backcourt, and then you play, one of the bigger wings at the 3. So they can slide some guys up and down the rotation, and I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how they play with that. I'm not necessarily like panicking if they don't add it. It would be nice, I think, for it. But I also think if you add a guy who's maybe a 20-minute-a-night backup wing, does that take you from, what you're going to be to being a little bit better? Like maybe in conference, but I don't see like another guy being added that would really change the outcome of like their national title hopes. I don't think that this team is shaping up to be a national title contender, at least early. We'll have to really see how all the pieces come together. But I'm not sure if there's a guy out there in the portal right now that would really be able to change that trajectory in such an immense way, nor could they really offer the minutes, right? If you think Gabe Brown's going to be playing close to 30 minutes per game, and for my druthers, I would like Max Christie to be playing 25 to 30. Like, what wing are you going to get that's okay with coming off the bench and is going to be a high-level guy to really raise that ceiling? I think that they could raise their floor a little bit. I'm not sure if they could have raised their ceiling enough. Unless maybe you get a guy like Bryce Thompson, you say you compete for the minutes right off the get-go, and then next year you have at least a spot cleared. But obviously he commits to Oklahoma State. There just wasn't enough for me there, and maybe they didn't move quick enough in that regard, and I think that that's a possibility that maybe the Watts returning was on their mind. I'm okay with it, I guess. Just the way that it's the roster is shaped and the way that it's looking, I'm not going to freak out if they don't add one. I would prefer maybe one extra body just for the depth purposes, but I think that they have enough at every spot where they should be okay, even if, God forbid, somebody got injured during the course of the season.
Yeah, so I think that's the concern that I have would be if I look up and down the roster, they're pretty well covered at the guard spot at this point. They're pretty well covered in the front court. You've got two guys in Hauser and Hall who theoretically it'd be really nice if they could play multiple spots, but honestly, they're both pretty much stuck at the 4 spot.
Yeah.
And that makes it complicated because I think you'd like both of them to be able to play alongside each other somehow, but it's difficult to do because you don't have really much rim protection or size down low if you play them at the 4 and the 5. And I don't think either of them projects as a high level 3, although I think you're right. Hall could maybe play spot minutes there, but the one spot I look at with this roster that is just very, I guess, susceptible to injury or a problem is the 3. And it's really just Gabe Brown, right?
Yeah.
Because like you said, Max Christie can slide down. He could play 30 minutes at the 3 if needed, but like, they don't have another guy besides Brown and Christie sliding down that's going to play that spot at all. If, God forbid, Gabe Brown went down, I think that roster looks really, really thin. You're stretching guys. You're playing too small or too big. And I know, like, obviously you can't just wish and create someone in the portal that you need. It's not like we can create a 6'7" wing that can shoot. But there's been guys that have come up and have gone. There's going to be more guys coming up in the future. I'm just hoping at some point, like, if it becomes clear Watts isn't returning, that it's like, okay, the staff is actively getting involved with some people here. Otherwise, I'm just kind of going to sit back and be like, okay, is the scholarship going to Steven Izzo? Is it going? Who's it going to at that point?
I don't disagree with you. I have heard that they were looking in the portal. There has been no names mentioned, but it doesn't surprise me because they have always kind of kept a lot of that stuff pretty close to the vest. They're extremely selective, as we've seen, about the way that they recruit guys. My guess is in a lot of instances, maybe they would like to see somebody in person before they do so, which is a little bit of an oddity, but the June calendar allows for guys to take visits. And I'm not sure how it would work in terms of players who are actually in the NCAA coming to take a visit. So maybe there's some of that. I haven't heard any specific names. I guess that gives me some pause. And I have been trying to do some digging from some of the people that I know around the program. I haven't heard anything. So I don't know what they're going to do. I would expect that it would make sense to add one more wing piece. But if they don't, like you said, if Max Christie or Gabe Brown gets injured during the season, then you're getting really thin. And then you're, like you said, kind of squeezing some guys in spots that maybe they shouldn't be. The one thing that I do like about the way that the roster is set up is that the future of this program is in a lot of ways kind of built on the freshmen coming in. And so one potential option to be able to plug that hole would be a guy like Pierre Brooks, who's 6'6", he's 210, he's pretty solid. I think he's going to get some backup minutes. Do you want him playing 25 to 30 a night? I don't know just yet if he's going to be ready for that. I would say of the three, the other two to me seem like guys that you will be instant plug and play and kind of know what you have. And he maybe has to kind of work himself in just based on some of the comp level that he's had over the years. But he is a potential option for that. And maybe they believe that he's a guy that should injury strike in some form or fashion that could step in. So I'm curious to see. I think that the freshmen get onto campus in early June. So we have till July for the transfer portal bonanza to come to an end. So maybe they want to see what they have and they get onto campus. They get a little bit better of assessment of what they have. And they say, well, listen, we need to go out and get one more guy. And maybe they don't. So again, I'm not sure exactly what will happen. I'm somewhat comfortable, although, again, injury to one of those two guys, you would be a little bit concerned. Turning to Michigan, they add Devante Jones from Coastal Carolina. I know that you're a fan. I've done a little bit of digging into some film and some of the numbers, all the rest of that with him. Franz Wagner has entered the NBA draft. That one was kind of lingering a little bit like this Watts decision where it was like, is this guy really going to come back? Like he's like a top 10 lottery pick. He better be going. So he's going to enter the draft. He's not going to come back. I'm curious what your take is on his general legacy. Obviously only 2 years here. I think that kind of the gap between Beeline and Howard to a certain degree was maybe helped plugged by him. I think that he certainly should be remembered for that. Maybe one of the most versatile and best defenders that Michigan has seen in a long time, just with his size and length and the ability to guard multiple different guys. What do you think generally about kind of his stamp that he left on the program? Obviously it didn't end the way that he wanted it to. But what do you think about him and just generally his next journey?
Yeah, so I'm rooting for Franz. I think he made the right decision. First of all, anytime you're a potential lottery pick, you should not come back to school, in my opinion. I did think for a while there was a real good chance that he was going to come back. There was no reason, in my opinion, to drag that decision out unless he was seriously thinking about it. I don't know if that was the case or not, but either way, it's going to be fun to watch him at the next level. I have never personally loved Franz Wagner's game like a lot of Michigan stars over the years. I respect him. I think he's a phenomenal player. For whatever reason, he's never been my favorite guy to watch. And I think part of it for me might just be he never really developed into that offensive off the dribble threat that I think in some ways the team was sorely lacking. You saw it at the end of the UCLA game. I mean, one missed shot does not encapsulate everything, right? Just like it doesn't with Aaron Henry. Both the seasons ended on an airball shot. But Franz didn't necessarily have counters unless he could get going right and he could get that little runner in the lane or get all the way to the rim. He was always a good, not great shooter, and I think he's billed as a great shooter going into the NBA. I think he should capitalize on that perception because honestly, I don't know that he's ever going to be a 40% shooter in the NBA. But he's so versatile is the thing. I mean, he's just a guy that can defend really probably 3 or 4 spots in the NBA. He's long enough to get switched onto bigs. He's athletic enough and laterally mobile enough to get switched onto guards. If he does figure it out offensively, he's going to be a key piece in a rotation no matter where he ends up. He could be on a tanking team and be one of their leading scorers, I think. He could be on an NBA title team and be a rotation guy off the bench. As far as legacy goes with Michigan, I do, despite how I feel about him personally, or if I like him or not, like watching him or not, I do think he is the second most important Michigan basketball player legacy-wise, only behind Trey Burke from the last decade. And the reason being, I mean, the Beeline thing could have tanked this program. And I know it sounds dramatic to say that now, but they were very close to hiring Providence as coach.
I dream about that every night. I go to sleep unbelievably.
A lot of people said they wanted Ed Cooley. And look, could Ed Cooley have come to Michigan and changed everything he does and been better? Maybe. I don't know. But
definitely not. I think he's a mediocre coach at best.
Yeah. And when Beeline left, right, the first domino to fall was Jalen Wilson decommitted. And he was really the big fish in a class. They obviously returned Simpson and Teskey. On paper, you think they were going to be okay no matter who the coach was. But there were there was a time when the future was uncertain. And then what Franz Wagner did was he committed to a coach that he had not really had any relationship with pretty much immediately after Juwan Howard was named the head coach. Like within a day, I believe Franz Wagner committed. And to be such a high-level player immediately, I mean, I think he kept Michigan a respectable team in year one. And then what he turned into in year two, obviously, was a huge reason why they were a 1 seed and a Big Ten champ. So I think, Juwan's perception publicly probably looks a lot different without Franz Wagner the last 2 years. And I think Michigan fans definitely really appreciate everything they saw from Franz.
I agree. I spoke with Ant Wright on this in the locker room, and he basically said that the commitment was to the school to a certain regard. Like Mo Wagner's experience at Michigan with the program was so unbelievable that he enjoyed it so much that he basically, it was an easy decision to make because of the experience that he had beforehand. So the fact that he kind of committed without really knowing how this thing was going to go, I think speaks a large volume to the experience that his brother had at Michigan and how much he enjoyed it. He is a guy that I think, I never feared, I guess. Like Mo Wagner towards the end, sophomore and junior year, I feared him. I feared seeing Nick Ward out in space against Mo Wagner. Like I would never really say that about Franz. He's a really nice player, a really nice complimentary piece. I think he's going to be a hell of an NBA player. I'm not sure that he's going to ever really be much more than a blip in the radar for me, at least from a Michigan State fan perspective. If you look at the guys that could give you buckets, like Iggy Brazdeikis was probably a much better all-around offensive player than Franz Wagner was. Obviously he loses 3 times to Michigan State, so that kind of changes what his look was, for the 1 year that he was here. But had he won a couple of those games, would he have been a guy that I feared a little bit more than, Franz Wagner? Probably. So I think a really nice player, like you said, a guy that kind of bridged the gap between the two coaches and kept to some degree just the image of what Michigan basketball was afloat a little bit. And it's going to pay dividends because he's getting another guy in the NBA. And I think it's going to go well on the recruiting trail to be able to show what they did with him over the years as well. So all around, wish him the best. It's going to be interesting to see kind of where he lands, but I think that he's going to be able to contribute basically day one onto an NBA roster. Devante Jones, I want to hear your take about him first. My first question to you in regards to him is right off the bat, is he going to be better than Mike Smith or is he not? And I want to hear that take and then tell me why or why not.
It's a very black or white question, but I'm going to
I know it is.
I'm going to answer it black and white and try to give you what you asked for.
Okay.
No, he is not going to be better than Mike Smith.
Okay.
I actually think Mike Smith was a little underappreciated by people, or at least by non-Michigan fans. I think Mike Smith was pretty phenomenal and about like a best case scenario for a 1-year transfer stopgap at a position as important as point guard. I don't think Devante Jones is going to be the creator, the assist man that Mike Smith was, or necessarily the spot shooter from 3. I don't think that means Devante Jones is necessarily a worse offensive player. I think in a lot of ways, Devante Jones has strengths that will fit in very perfectly with what Michigan brings back. He's very efficient. He's had years where he was a 6 assist guy. He's had years where he was an 18-point guy. Like he's kind of done it all, and his role has changed a lot. But the consistent theme has been he's been a very successful, good individual player, no matter what his role has been within the teams at Coastal Carolina. I think he's a better defender than Mike Smith by a lot. And he's a guy that led the country in steals. I don't know how much of that was necessarily just like pickpocketing players that can't really dribble at a Big Ten level. So I don't think he's going to lead the country in steals at Michigan, but I do think like the combination of him and Eli Brooks theoretically projects as a pretty solid defensive pairing in the backcourt. But yeah, I don't think he's not going to be a pick and roll guy the way Mike Smith was. He definitely seems eager to prove that he can do some things. Like he's been pretty vocal since committing about outers, and like his name appeared on the NBA radar, and he's like quoting it, like saying we got to silence these people or something. So I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Another guy talking trash before he gets to Michigan seems about right.
Well, it's not trash like that. I think he responded to one of Dylan's tweets because Dylan just like quote tweeted, the UM Hoops account quote tweeted an NBA mock draft saying Devante Jones, like at 50. I think he said surprising, maybe. I don't know. I could be making that up, but Devante quoted it and was just like, they keep sleeping or something. I'm like, Dylan's in your camp, dude. Like, we gotta just make sure everybody's on the same page here. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I'm glad they got him. I think he was fill the need that they wanted to go fill. He's a guy that if Frankie Collins is great right away, Frankie Collins probably still gets to 25, 30 minutes, even with Devante.
That was going to be my next question. So where do you see the minute allocation kind of breaking down between him and Collins? If you had to guess right here, right now, obviously Jones maybe gets a little bit more run at the beginning of the season, but we're hitting January, mid-January, entering maybe into February. Where do you see the split of minutes between him and Collins?
I'm going to hedge my bets here and say it's 2020.
Yeah, that's where I would go.
I think Jones has the first shot at the role, obviously. I'm a lot higher on Frankie Collins, I think, than most people are. I think the vision's there. I love the tenacity that he plays with. I think he's going to be a solid defender from day one. The only thing that we know is a negative with Frankie Collins right away is the jump shot.
Yeah.
But for a team that needs just creation in general, I mean, he's going to be surrounded by a spot shooter in Eli Brooks, a spot shooter in Caleb Houston, an All-American center in Hunter Dickinson. Like, they just need a guard up that can beat people off the bounce. And I think Jones could do that. I think Frankie can do that. I think the most likely thing is that Jawan's going to expand his rotations this year. He played really like an 8.5 man rotation for most of his 2 seasons here so far. And I think you're going to see 10 people play, and 10 people play 10 minutes a game minimum. And that might be the trend going forward if he keeps pulling in recruiting classes with a lot of high impact guys.
That's all fair. I kind of agree with the assessment. I think Jones is going to be a better scorer around the rim than Mike Smith was. I think that he's not going to be quite, like you said, the ball creator. And again, the one question I had coming into last year for the rotation was who is going to be able to help create offense for the rest of the guys. And I think that the one issue that you maybe have is who's going to do it this year. Because Eli Brooks is a great ball mover. He's a guy that can maybe take a dribble or two and get to his spots in the mid-range. He's not a guy that really can get all the way downhill and suck guys in and create for other people. I think Jones might be able to do a little bit of that, get into the paint, but he's not a guy that I think is going to be running, 30 ball screens a game where he's just getting option after option and creating out of that. You look at kind of how the front court's shaping. Obviously, Dickinson's going to be the man in the middle. Diabate's not a guy I think will really stretch it out year one. Does he stick around for 2 or not? I think he's got probably enough upside where maybe he flashes enough and goes, but he's not a guy that probably will consistently shoot that 3. I could be mistaken. Maybe he comes in and looks like that. I think that he's got a lot of tools in the chest, but maybe there's not exactly one skill set that you can point to that he's great at outside of maybe just being defensively extremely versatile. On the offensive end, I think it'll be a little bit questioned. He's going to be more of like a cutter finisher around the rim, in my opinion, than a guy that like you're either posting up or he's like coming off a screen and spotting up. Like, I don't see that from him. So there's going to be some guys that can shoot the ball, but who's going to get it to them in the spots that they need to, particularly Houston. And that's the biggest question that I have, because he's a guy that seems to me to be a really good spot up guy, kind of that Isaiah Livers, where maybe it takes him a little while to be able to put it on the deck consistently to get his own shot. He needs somebody to help create. And when he does, he's going to be a lights out shooter. But who is that going to be on the roster? Frankie Collins can give you some of that again, but what happens when teams, don't respect the jumper? The court begins to shrink a little bit, and so there's no lanes to shoot because they're not going to respect the jumper. And we saw that a little bit with Xavier Simpson over the years, kind of until his senior year where he started hitting that consistently. So it'll be very interesting to me to kind of see how that goes. The talent is just there. The talent is on the roster. It's how do the pieces kind of come together for this Michigan team. And like you said, he's going to be playing a wider range of guys because there's just so much talent on the team. And you really don't know what you're getting kind of out of the guard group outside of Brooks and maybe to a certain degree Jones. The young guys, Zeb Jackson did not get enough run. You don't know what he's giving you. Kobe Buffkin looks like he's going to be a guy that can come in and make an instant impact, but physically, is he going to be ready from day one? And then Collins is in the same boat too, where he just needs some refinement, particularly of the jump shot. if he can't get there this season, is he going to play as many minutes as we expect? And is that backcourt, it comes back down to this ultimate question. The front court is definitely national title contender. Is that backcourt going to be able to get to a spot where Michigan has that for this next season? And I'm not sure if Jones and Brooks give it to you. I think you have to get Bufkin and, some of the guys like Jackson and Collins kind of up to speed a little bit, and that's going to require playing them and going through some bumps. I think it's going to be a little bit of a bumpier transition in the early part of the season, and then we're going to maybe see it come together a little bit more towards the end. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the nice thing about the four guys, and I'm leaving Zeb Jackson out of it, I'll get to him in just a minute, but the four guys being Collins, Bufkin, Jones, and Brooks, is that if Collins and Bufkin both struggle early significantly, I mean, you can run Brooks and Jones out there for 30, 35 minutes each if you got to win the game. But I think they're going to be given the leeway to play through some of their struggles early, and hopefully that's going to help them develop into key rotation pieces by the end of the year. I actually think of I guess between Collins and Bufkin, I think Bufkin is going to be immediately ready. I think he's going to be a pick and roll creator. And I guess what I like about Jones and Brooks is that theoretically, if Collins was great right away, or if Bufkins was great right away, they could both slide. Like Jones could play the 2. Brooks could slide over and play the 1. Like whoever's working well for you, you're going to be able to move those cards around and make it work. I think Zeb Jackson is interesting because Brendan Quinn from The Athletic is reporting that this is almost like news. Like it's not an opinion, it's news that Zeb Jackson has been moved to the 2, which seems like an odd time to report that, number one, but 2 seems to indicate to me that you feel pretty good about your point guard spot because Zeb was supposed to be a natural 1, a point guard, and he didn't play well at all last year. I don't think minutes are going to be there at the 2 for him when you have Eli Brooks back, likely going to play 30. So it's interesting unless like maybe the thought is Bufkin's a 3 and Caleb Houston slides to the 4. I don't know. There's so many ways to make it work, but I think Zeb Jackson is not going to be part of the rotation. And I think there's some behind the scenes things that must make them feel confident at the point guard spot that would cause them to announce that he's a 2 now. I don't know what that is.
Guess I never really saw him as a point guard. I always kind of thought he was a combo guard, like a guy that was ball handling, but I don't know if you necessarily want to run the point guard spot through him. So I guess it's not surprising to me that he's being labeled as a 2 per se, but I do think that that's important, right? Because if Brooks is going to play, 30 minutes, let's say, and maybe 5 to 10 are at the point guard spot, that means at least 20, 25 minutes are going to be kind of locked up at that 2. And Bufkin is right there chomping at the bit, ready to get some of that. To me, Bufkin's, he's got some size. I know he's been growing. I don't think physically he would hold up that well at the small forward spot in the Big Ten. I think that would be a lot to ask to defend the wing from there. I think he's probably more comfortably a very large and athletic 2 rather than you slide him down and you're putting him at a physical disadvantage at that position. But like you said, they have some ability to move guys up and down, kind of that rotation, particularly with Houston being able to play the 3 or the 4, Diabate playing the 4 or the 5. So a lot of versatility with that rotation as well. And it'll be really interesting to kind of see how it all comes together during the course of the year. Michigan has as talented a team as basically anybody in the conference this year. And that kind of pivots us into what I want to discuss in the next little spot, just generally the Big Ten teams. I wanted to talk about the portal and maybe some larger look, but we're already at 45 minutes here. I got a beer o'clock meeting in about 15, 20 minutes here. So I think the last time when we went an hour and a half, I'd be surprised if everybody listened the whole way through. So maybe we make that our next pod in regards to, I kind of wanted to discuss like ascending and descending teams, not looking just next year, but taking a bigger look at maybe programs long-term over the next 3 to 4 years and kind of discussing the relative strengths and weaknesses and where we kind of see the programs. You did a really nice article, the Big Ten Stock Exchange. The Moving Screen podcast ended up coming out with one. We were going to focus our entire podcast just kind of on the Big Ten, but they did that, and I didn't really want to overlap with that. So before we kind of get to that, maybe the next one, I did want to discuss generally just your thoughts on maybe Big Ten contenders heading into next season, kind of where you had it. I think at least for the teams that are near the top, the rosters are kind of set already in that spot. Briefly, I just want to touch on some of the transfers that we've seen. Illinois really took it on the chin this last couple weeks since we've done the last pod. Assistant coaches, both Orlando Antigua and Chin Coleman, returned to UK. I think one of them at least was from there originally. Is that correct, or were both? I can't remember that off the top.
I believe one of them was, yeah.
I think Antigua was, if I remember that correctly, but I could be wrong. Anyways, both leave the program, head to Kentucky. Adam Miller ends up choosing LSU. He's not going to return back to the fold. I guess that's nice for him. He's going to have to play no defense and have complete offensive freedom. I guess if that's what you're looking for, plus maybe a little bag drop, you got what you're looking. And then AJ Storr this week, just yesterday, decommits. I assume that was probably tied with some of the recruiting from the assistant coaching. So he's a 22 shooting guard. He kind of has had his stock rising lately. His offers have increased, and I wonder if a certain degree they're taking a step back and reassessing the situation and maybe going a little closer to home. I think he plays for AZ Compass, so he's like an Arizona kid. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then CJ Frederick of Iowa ends up committing to UK. So basically Calipari picked clean from some of the carcasses in the Big Ten to be able to glean some of the good players from it. I think that their roster is going to kind of be interesting this year. They just land Ty Washington, who's now moved up to a top 15 point guard spot. I think he's the third overall point guard rated in this class. What's your general take on UK heading into next season? They had an absolutely abysmal season. Instead of kind of that typical one and done grab that he usually does to reload the roster, he turns to the transfer portal and completely revolutionizes the roster for the most part. He grabbed Oscar Tshiebwe from West Virginia in the middle of the season last year. Bob Huggins was not pleased with that. And they have some really nice pieces that actually fit together. Is UK going to be back next season? And are they potentially a national title contender?
They're going to be better for sure. I'm pretty excited to watch next year's team. I've actually gotten pretty tired in general of Calipari's whole 5 new freshmen every year facade that he does. Like, it's fun when he gets the elite of the elite. It hasn't been working very well when he gets a bunch of top 20, 40 kids. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. So I think it's a good pivot for him. It's not surprising to me that he is the big winner of the transfer portal. Like, it is what it is. John Calipari is going to be able to pick up a phone and get guys that he wants. But yeah, I think they'll be good. I love Kellen Grady. I love CJ Frederick. I love all the guys individually that they've got. I think if they're going to be great, Ty Washington's going to be great right away. And there's been, how many point guards has there been in the last decade where going into the year you think this guy's going to be great, and then he ends up not being much of a high level guy right away? Like, their last 3 seasons they've struggled because they haven't had that guard spot guy. Yeah. So I don't know. I like them. I think they're a top 10 team for sure to start the year.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see with the point guard spot. Obviously, always comes to that. For me, college basketball is built up the center. It's your point guard and center spot. If you have those two stable, then it kind of all can fall into place. Oscar Tshiebwe, which I didn't really know much about him, but I dug into him just in regards to kind of who he was and what he does. One of the best rebounders on both sides of the ball in the entire country. So that's kind of nice for them to have around a couple shooters. Ty Washington, I think, shot above 40% this season from 3. He's a guy that's a facilitator. He's got decent size at 6'3". He kind of is a guy that can score, but I think he's a pass-first guy too. So I think it's a really good fit with what they have on the roster. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they bounce back, how many true freshman point guards lead, potential Final Four teams. That's the really tough spot. Those guys are usually one and done type guys, and I'm not sure if Ty is quite that. But I think it's an interesting pivot, and really the transfer portal is the new free agency in NCAA basketball. There's no real sense to have to take 4 or 5 guys every class when you know that there's going to be multiple guys available in the portal the next year, particularly when you're trying to find production that's proven. A lot of what we've seen is, do commits work out or not? And that sometimes takes a little bit of time. If you know what you have in a guy and it's a high major to high major transfer, or even if a mid-major transfer where he's really productive against high major opponents, then you have a little better idea of proven worth when a guy like that transfers. And I think Going forward, the combination of being able to recruit at high level and get some of these high level guys and guys that are kind of stabilizing the program during the course of the year, and also an instant plug and play, somewhat what Juwan Howard did last year, is extremely important. And it's the way that college basketball is headed. So it's interesting to see Cal, after a couple of years where he kind of had a couple dud classes, or at least not living up to the hype that they should have been, pivot into what is the new, I guess the new portal, the one and done, play for a team for a year in the mid-major and then get your shot at a high major and potentially put yourself in a better position to have an NBA future. And I think that that's what a lot of these kids are going to do kind of going forward. And I think it's going to help the parity in basketball for sure too.
Yeah, three very different ways to approach the portal in the SEC. You've got John Calipari just cleaning up, getting everybody he wants. You've got Tom Crean losing 7 of his 8 leading scorers and doing nothing to replace them. And then you've got Will Wade just flying into recruitments that he hasn't even been in, dropping bags, landing Efton Reed, landing Adam Miller. It's just a mess down in the South, but very entertaining for us in Big Ten country to go watch that happen.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's try to wrap up the last part of this podcast. I want to touch briefly. The schedules were dropped for the teams. I want to discuss conference contenders. To me, I think that I have 4. I don't know where you stand on that, so I'm curious to see. For me, it's going to be Michigan, Purdue, Ohio State, and Michigan State. I don't think I'm going to order them until I kind of get a better feel, and we'll do power rankings before we head into the season. But I just want to touch kind of on where your thoughts are. Are with those the 4 teams that you think are potential conference contenders? Would you have either any of those 4 out of that mix or another team in it? And I guess maybe I would ask you briefly if you already have a position where you would rank those teams 1 through 4.
Yeah, so I really wanted to be different than you, but those are my 4 as well. I think you and I agree in general on a lot of the pretenders versus contenders at the top of the Big Ten. I think of those 4, prior to seeing the schedules released, I would have probably been highest on Michigan and Ohio State, and then a little drop off to Purdue. And then I think Michigan State is definitely a contender, but there's a lot to see play out before we know if they're going to be able to crack the top 10. Now, I don't want to overreact to schedules because I think that's a dumb way to look at it. Like, at the end of the day, the best team usually wins the conference. But Purdue got a great break here.
A huge break.
I mean, I have been very anti-Purdue. I want to pick against them, but it's enough for me to at least consider, like, should I sneak a little futures bet on Purdue right now? Because, I mean, they basically, of those other 3 teams, they get them all, or they get Michigan twice, but they get Ohio State once, Michigan State once, Maryland once.
Yep.
And they play.
Who I would say is just on the fringe of the contender for me, right? I don't think that they're quite there. I don't trust Turgeon. We'll see what happens with all those wings, whether they come back or not. That's still all up in the air. But to me, I don't think adding, Fats Russell in the center, I don't know. I don't think that makes you automatically a contender. Like all these preseason rankings that are coming out and they're in the top 5 and top 10. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. I'm not even sure if they're firmly going to be a top 5 team. So,
yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, just objectively looking at this too, like if you're thinking Michigan's going to win the Big Ten next year, they got to beat Purdue twice because they play 3 more games against that group of Ohio State, Maryland, Michigan State than Purdue does. So there are, say Purdue wins 2, like Michigan's out of the race at that point, barring injury or some crazy collapse. So I don't know. I think every year you can make a case one team got a lucky schedule. Michigan had a really easy schedule last year. I think Michigan State has benefited in previous years where they've won the conference. 17, 18, they had a really easy one. Yeah, it always happens to somebody. But I don't know. I'm flipping on Purdue a little bit because I was so ready to just ride against them all season long, and it's not off to a good start for my Purdue hate. Well,
yeah, I've kind of been waving the flag a little bit. I think when we come to the conference power rankings, I'm going to certainly take what you've said into consideration because I had Wisconsin near the top last year. They didn't quite pan out. I think there's more upside for this Purdue roster than there was for Wisconsin last year. But I think every year that you do this, when you rank teams, and it was my first time kind of doing it into last season, that there's considerations for returning players, who's going to improve, what you have coming back. And I think you learn every year a little bit about the way to assess teams. So I'm going to recalibrate some of the way that I do it. And I learned a lesson coming into next year, and we'll see if I end up choosing Purdue or not, because maybe then I wouldn't have learned my lesson, but maybe I like the upside a little bit more than what I had from Wisconsin. But I think that those are the four. I think probably you would feel maybe most comfortable about the three. Michigan State, to me, has as much upside as any of those teams. They don't quite have, obviously, the big option, and that's probably what sets them apart. But I would say that I like some of what they have in the backcourt as well, if not better than every team, maybe except for Michigan. So again, there's a lot of new pieces, and while there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of upside on the roster. Is that all realized? It certainly was not last year. So it remains to be seen kind of how I'm going to assess this. I'm probably just going to start buying into the hype over this offseason. When I hear stuff coming from the camp, I'm going to get excited before the season starts. I'll have them ranked too high probably, but that's the fan part of me. I'm going to try my best to come with an analytical mind to how I would take a look at the season. But I do think that those are kind of the four teams that should be in the mix for it. And maybe Michigan State is a little bit behind the eight ball, just trying to get all the pieces working together. But I do think the talent is as talented there as basically any team except maybe Michigan because of what they have in the front court. Next pivot, and kind of the last little bit that I want to discuss, we're pretty far out still. Maybe there's some more roster moves one way or the other, but I'd like to hear maybe your first team all Big Ten selections, freshman of the year, potential defensive player of the year, and then most improved player. Let's start with the first team, and then I'll give you mine, and we'll go back and forth here.
You go first. I want to hear yours first.
Okay. I didn't write this out before we came because I wanted to I should have done a little bit more research for it probably first, but right off the gun, I would lean Trace Jackson Davis, obviously. And I think that you have to have the Trace Jackson Davis. Hunter Dickinson has to be on there. At the very least, he's going to give you the same production as he did last year. So that's he was on what? He was on one, whether it was the coaches or the player. Do you remember how that worked out? I think he was on one first team and then one second team.
Yeah, he was mentioned on all but one first team. I forget which one it was.
The media and the coaches split, I think, on the first team with him. So he already was there. I would expect him to be back barring any type of injury. So Trace Jackson, Hunter Dickinson. It sucks that I have to maybe go with all big men because sometimes I'd like to see them do it like maybe with some guards in mind. But
are we playing the position game here, or can we go?
I don't think that you can because they don't really do that. They don't really take that much into consideration, in my opinion. I don't think that they look at that. They just take the five best guys. So, I don't know if I want to say Jaden. I don't think he quite gets there. It's between him and Trevion Williams. So one of those two guys I think will be on the first team. I would lean the big man who is going to have the rebounding production as well to go with it. But is it possible that Jaden Ivey springs himself onto this list? I think that that's probably possible, but I'll say Trevion. If EJ Liddell comes, he's going to be a hard guy to keep off. Is it going to just be all big men? Is that what I'm selecting right now? That's a tough.
I think the four best players in the conference are clearly big men, and I think it's the four you just named.
Yes, I would agree with that. Like, if you're looking at a guard who potentially could spring himself onto it, for me, it would probably be either Jaden Ivey or Andre Curbelo. I think Curbelo is going to put up the stats next year, but how good is Illinois going to be? And I think that they always take that somewhat into consideration. If the team doesn't achieve quite at a high level, if they're not in that top 4 or 5 mix. Did Marcus Carr get first team this year? Did you remember?
He did.
Okay. Well, his point production was absurd, and Andre Curbelo is probably not going to get quite there. But would it surprise you if Curbelo was like a 15-7-4 type guy next season?
I think 15 would surprise me with Curbelo. I don't know that I think his scoring upside is going to be there, especially if he starts being the number one guy on the scouting report as opposed to playing next to Ayo Dosunmu. But I do think like 7 assists might be on the low end of the spectrum, as crazy as that sounds. Like, I think he's a special playmaker that as his usage goes up, his turnovers are probably going to go up too. But like, he could easily get 8, 9, 10 assists on a very regular basis with this team. And they, as much as like Illinois has been killed by the coaching stuff and they're awaiting Kofi Coburn's word, they've done a decent job filling in pieces around him. Like Trent Frazier and Devonte Williams are back. At least there's like proven catch and shoot guys that can play next to Curbelo. So I don't think Illinois is going to be nearly as good as they were this year, but I do think it sets Curbelo up pretty nicely to be a really good player. I would go if we're going no positions, I would go the 4 you mentioned: Dickinson, TJD, Williams, Liddell, and then Curbelo would be my 5th. I'm leaving Jaden Ivey off until I can be proven that he can make 40% of his shots from the floor.
All right, that's fair. I know we're going to have that debate
when
we come into it. We're going to have that debate when we come into the conference season and just discussing kind of what he is. But yeah, I would say that. And then you kind of look at what the teams are, and that's an interesting thing. Like the guard play last year in the Big Ten wasn't overly great. Like there was a lot of good wings, but there wasn't a lot of good guard play. And then now all these wings are leaving. Wagner, Frederick. I don't think Wieskamp comes back. Wieskamp would be up there. I mean, if he does return, I would be surprised if he does, but he would be on this list for me too, because he's going to just get a ton of different shots.
Keegan Murray, another guy, could.
Yeah, I thought about that. I don't know if the production will be there. To me, he's more of a secondary kind of guy than he is a first. And now with Frederick and possibly Wieskamp gone, he's going to be asked to do a lot. I'm not sure if he's ready for that large of burden to carry, maybe until, junior season. I'm not sure if it comes sophomore, so that'll be interesting to see. But I think we kind of touched on the right players, and then maybe I don't think reaching up into the first team, but if you're looking at maybe guys that are on the perimeter that can give you a boost, I think Houston and Max Christie both will be guys that maybe make all Big Ten teams. Maybe they don't give you quite the production to get into the first team, but guys that will certainly be contributors, and that'll be interesting to see. Freshman of the year, who are you going here?
Oh boy. So I tweeted out, I saw somebody, you know who it was that tweeted about Big Ten Freshman of the Year. I forget the name, but I quote tweeted it and provided what my best guesses would be if I was handicapping I saw
that.
A betting pool. And I thought people were going to love that, and nobody responded. So thank you for listening to this. But I think it's tough because Michigan and Michigan State both have all the best freshmen, but they also have a lot of freshmen. And they also, like, Michigan has a lot of other guys too. Like, is anyone really going to win Freshman of the Year when Hunter Dickinson is going to get a touch every single possession?
Dominate the possessions.
Yeah. So I think that alone, if you're going for a high profile guy who also has opportunity, then Max Christie has to be the favorite. But I don't know that would necessarily be my pick. And I also think there's a couple sleepers from non-Michigan, Michigan State schools here, of like Bryce McGowan's from Nebraska and Malachi Branham from Ohio State, who are both top 50 guys that will probably slot in and be starters immediately. So I don't know. It's interesting. I guess Christie's probably the favorite. I don't think, unless Houston is just like a complete dead eye, like somehow gets to 15, 16 a game on just ridiculous shooting percentages, I don't see him winning, partially because I don't see him being a very like on ball guy.
Right.
I think Christie will get more opportunity early. And I think of the Michigan guys, I think the most likely one to work their way into the conversation is Moussa Diabate. And I know the front court's loaded, but I think of all guys that could just like, you know how sometimes like you don't know what a recruit's going to be, but then you watch the very first game of the season and you watch a guy step on the court and you're just like, whoa. Like that's what I anticipate is going to happen with Moussa Diabate a little bit. He may only play 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes are going to be filled with block shots, with rebounds, because he's just huge. And hopefully with some electrifying dunks for Michigan fans. So I don't know, but yeah, Christie is probably the safe bet for now.
I would lean that way as well. I think Branham might have a little bit of an impediment to playing time if Dwayne Washington comes back. I guess that's decision's still there. If not, then maybe he does. But Michi Johnson's in the fold there as well. So that will be interesting to see. Tamar Bates is a top 30 guy from Indiana. Does he maybe come in and make a splash? That's a possibility, but I think that he, again, is probably going to be coming off the bench possibly. So I would lean Max Christie for this one. Yeah, I guess Diabate is an interesting one. There's no doubt about that, because he will fill some of the blocks and rebound stats and maybe make enough impact. And if Michigan ends up, finishing first or second next season, again, I think some of that's taken into consideration the impact that the freshman makes on the general squad for it. Defensive player of the year. This one's always tough because a lot of times there's not really a front runner per se until you get like 3 quarters in the season. You're like, well, this guy's kind of been locking down and that's there. Do you have any players that you would feel potentially could fill this spot, or what are you thinking in terms of possible defensive player of the year? Like Daryl Morcell won it last year, and it should have been Franz Wagner. He didn't even make the first team. So I don't think that they respect the voting in this all that much, in my opinion. So where do you think that they go with it?
So I would pick Keegan Murray if he didn't play for Iowa, but there's just no way anybody on Iowa will ever win that award. I don't have a name. I'm just going to guess based on the history of this award. It's going to go to like a Maryland wing or a Rutgers wing, like whichever one becomes a ball hawk out of nowhere on a decent but okay team. It's never the best defender that wins this award. And it seems to never be a guy from like one of the better teams in the conference either. It seems to be like this like they want to reward like a Penn State guy or a Maryland guy who doesn't.
Michigan State's won 2 of the last 5, right? And both of them were on good teams on Big Ten championships.
Oh, have they? I didn't realize they won any.
Jaron Jackson won in 2018. He won Freshman of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year, and Xavier Tillman won last season.
Okay. I didn't even realize either of those won.
Yeah.
Honestly,
right. It's like Jamari Wheeler won a few years back. Daryl Morcell. I can't remember who they gave it to. I don't know, in between there. But Michigan State's won a couple, at least. I mean, I guess maybe you have to be known for defense to be able to win that. I'm not 100% certain. It seems to me like the voting was pretty poor last year on it. I did write in the article that I think Marcus Bingham has Defensive Player of the Year upside if he plays 20-plus minutes. I'm not going to predict that he wins this award because I can't predict whether the staff's going to play him that amount of time. But I think that if they give him 20 minutes per game, he's a guy that can definitely block 2+ shots a game and kind of hold it down on the defensive end. With Miles Johnson transferring to UCLA, in my opinion, he is the best defensive rim protector in the conference right now. Whether he actually gets the playing time to show that all season is a complete mystery, and we won't know until we see it. So I'm just going to leave that one right where it is. And last but not least, before we wrap it up today, most improved player. Who you got?
Oh, there's a lot of good candidates. It's the same names we've already said. It's Ivy, it's Curbelo, it's Keegan Murray. That's probably it, I think, for the main 3 that would headline this, unless, honestly, there's a lot of guys on Michigan State that, if given opportunity, fall in there. I think the safe bet, I'm going to stick with Curbelo because I like him the most of those 3 between Murray, Curbelo, and Ivy. Also, could Ivy's stats go up? Maybe, but everybody's back on that team. I think the combination of talent and development with opportunity is there the most for Curbelo.
That's probably where I would go as well. It's funny that you say that about Michigan State because Gabe Brown's a senior, Marcus Bingham's a senior, but they could win the award because they just haven't gotten the run. But that's a real possibility, right? I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, if anybody becomes an all-conference
Joey
player,
Hauser, right?
If any veteran on Michigan State becomes an all-conference player, they're most improved.
After the season they had, that is actually very true. So I can't scoff at that opinion. But I would lean probably Curbelo too. I think he showed flashes last year, and it wouldn't surprise me if he kind of develops into what he's got to take care of the ball better. That's the one big caveat with him. He turned it over way too much last season. If he can limit the turnovers and the assist percentage and efficiency is as high as it was, I think he's a wizard with the ball. He's one of the most fun guys to watch in the conference. I know we all had our laugh about Illinois, just the way that they ended last year and all the rest of it. But he's a guy that's really, really fun to watch. And with kind of some of these point guards coming in that we have Jones and Walker, it's nice to have a familiar face that's going to be fun to watch at the point guard spot because it's been a little bit down since Cassius left and Simpson and, We lost Anthony Cowan from Maryland. The last couple of years, it's been a little bit down. So I'm hoping that we get a resurgence of better point guard play in the conference this year.
Yeah, I think we're looking at Frankie Collins and Jay Nakins to
I know, I love it.
Lift it in the future.
Last
thing on most improved, if a guy that didn't play in the Big Ten before this year could win that award, count me in for Fast Russell. I think.
All right. You like the Fast Russell then. I get that. We'll have a talk about him too before. But I think that's going to wrap us up today. We're at an hour 10. We're going to come back and we're going to discuss maybe in a larger picture kind of the state of the programs over in the top part of the conference and get a general idea of where the programs are headed and kind of are you buying stock long-term, not the short-term, of these various programs. So I think we'll come back with the next one, hopefully have maybe some news on where Watts is going. Maybe there's more transfer portal news, but trying to give you as much content as we can in the offseason. The offseason player profiles, like I said, will be up on SpartanHoops.com. We'll be pushing those out on Twitter, releasing at least 1 to 2 a week and just kind of giving you guys little nibbles during the course of this season as we build into the offseason and really get the recruiting going, which should start picking up again kind of into June. So, again, thank you, everybody from Spartan Hoops. I'm your host, David Klein, with Greg Waddell, my co-host. It's Friday, baby. Go get a beer. Take care, man.
Peace.